Oh, it's so great to be here, to be in my home church and to give this program one more time. I don't know if you all know this or not, but book reviewers pick their books out a year in advance, even more than a year in advance, usually March, during the month of March. And then we all get together. There's about 25 or so professional book reviewers in Dallas. We all get together to make sure we're not doing the same subject or anything like that. And last March, a year ago March, when I was picking out a book, I didn't have any idea. I'm on book lists, I watch the bestseller list, I love history books, and I tend to focus on nonfiction, but I didn't have any idea, March a year ago, what I was going to do. And I read a review about a book that was coming out in June called When Women Ran Fifth Avenue. And it was by an author that I recognized. Her name's Julie Satow. And she had written a book about the Plaza Hotel in New York. Now, I've never stayed at the Plaza, but I've sat in the lobby and pretended like I was. But she is a journalist, and usually when journalists write nonfiction books, they're very well researched. So I took a leap of faith and said I was going to do her book, and eagerly awaited the mail on June 6th when it came. I immediately dived into it and said, this is it. So I hope you're gonna like this story that I'm gonna tell you tonight about this book. Well, in the, make sure I can do this. There we go. Okay, look at this picture. We've always had stores and shoppings in the United States or in the early Americas. We always had kind of stores and shopping. I'm looking at this picture, and I think the lady in the dark dress is the customer. And I am imagining that she's buying some fabric for a new dress. I don't know if she's going to buy just enough fabric for the dress or if it's going to take a whole bolt of fabric to buy her new dress. And look up in the top, that shelf on top. Do you see the just the white blouse? That would be a shirt waist. I bet it had lace on it. And then the young woman in the white shirt waist is probably the clerk. She's timid. She doesn't know. She's new at this maybe. And here's this rather imposing woman who wants to know what this fabric is and how much it is per yard. And probably when the customer's through buying her fabric, she's going to go to the other side of the store and buy some overalls for her husband, and then go to the front of the store and get a gallon of milk and a pound of beans. So everything was right there. The idea of department stores has always been around here, and even if it was in a little country store like that. So, there we go. This is the epigram that Julie Satow chose to go in the front of her book. It was written for a newspaper article in 1910. So remember, think 1910 when I read this to you. Buying and selling, serving and being served. Women. On every floor, in every aisle, in every counter, women. Down in the basement, buying and selling, bargains and marked down summer frocks, women. Up under the roof, posting ledgers, auditing accounts, attending to all the complex bookkeeping of a great metropolitan department store, all women. Behind most of the counters, on all the floors between, women, simply a moving, seeking, hurrying mass of femininity, in the midst of which the occasional man shopper, man clerk, and men supervisors looked lost and out of place. So it was into this hothouse atmosphere with women all around that we're going to talk about three women who kind of did an above and beyond as far as department stores. First of all was a lady named Hortense Odlum, and she's going to transform Bonwit Teller, a department store, to something that women would want to go, where women would want to go shop. And then Dorothy Shaver, who made Lord & Taylor almost an American institution. And finally, Geraldine Stutz, who took a very fancy boutique and made it into one of the best department stores in the country. So those are the ones that we're going to talk about tonight. Now, this is the tea room in Marshall Fields in Chicago. Department stores, you have to know, in order to understand these women, we're going to have to know a little bit of the history of department stores. Department stores were magnificent places. They would have, you could go to a department store and find a post office, find out when the civil service exams were posted, maybe a dentist's office, certainly a tea room, probably a nursery where you could drop off your child, and there was always a doctor and an RN on duty. In those big department stores, all of those things would be there. I'm sure if you grew up in Dallas, you probably remember the tea room at Tych's downtown. I remember kind of big tree trunks there. And that was the first time I ever saw a fashion show, a real fashion show with models that walked back and forth. I had an aunt that lived in Dallas, so we would come over from Arkansas once or twice a year to do some shopping. And you'd dress up when you went to the department store, right? You'd dress up maybe even wear a hat. Maybe your mother wore a hat. And you felt, walking through the door and walking through that tea room, you felt, well, fashionable. It made you feel good to dress up like that. You might go before Easter to get your white shoes, because heaven forbid you should wear black patent shoes after Easter, and certainly you wouldn't wear your white shoes after Labor Day. So you might go to the department store and get your shoes. Now, my grandmother made all my clothes. I didn't have a store-bought dress till I was 12 years old, but I had 2 or 3 new dresses a week. And so I remember my first store-bought dress real well, but I did have to have hat and gloves and shoes every Easter, and maybe a new purse too. But maybe you went with the idea of that stiffly starched, dotted sweat, itchy dress that your mother wanted you to have, and you really liked the little cotton one better. Now, department stores were places where we could go to find all that stuff. It was like a fairyland. Some department stores, I told you some of the amenities they offered, but they might also offer there would be a fish pond or a petting zoo for the children, all kinds of things that these department stores would have. And they all were competing against each other. I just read a new book recently. I'm researching books and reading for my review next year. And department stores used to have huge bookstore type things. And they competed with each other, trying to get the best big sellers in as soon as they could. And I don't remember that. Maybe you remember going to a department store, to the big book department to find there. There was even one department store in Oklahoma City that had a baby day where they offered 9 babies up for adoption. And 6 of those babies found a nice home from that. There were windows. Famous artists would design the windows. Famous artists would draw the illustrations for all of the advertising that the department stores were going to do. They were just such a big deal. Now, if my granddaughter wants to go shopping, we are more likely to head to the laptop than a department store. You know, I still kind of like to go and feel the material and everything. So those 3 women I talked about, let's start with Florence. Isn't she cute and pretty? Florence Odlum was born in St. George, Utah. Now, her main goal in life from the time she was 12 years old was to get out of St. George, Utah. Her father was not very present in the home. Her grandparents had come to Utah with Brigham Young's colony, and they spent the first 2 years cooking over a campfire and living in a tent. They were very devout Mormons. By the time, 2 generations later, by the time Hortense was born, the family wasn't quite as devout. In fact, the father was not present in the home much, and it was because he was out selling liquor to the indigenous tribes. So her mother divorced her father and eventually remarried. They didn't have to live in a tent and cook over a campfire anymore. They had a nice stucco home, and the mother made money by renting it out and to the miners that were coming to the area. When Hortense was 12, she got a sewing machine, and she made her own clothes. She knew how to sew a fine seam. She knew how to what made a dress stylish, how to tailor a dress, how to make it fit well. She learned all those things. And she subscribed to fashion magazines, even in the early part of the 20th century. She subscribed to magazines that told her to do things like beat their thighs to get the cellulose out of them, and how you could make a bow on a dress to do better for you. All those things she learned when she was young. When she was 16, her mother and stepfather sent her to high school in Provo, Utah, big city. She got to go to the big city. And she graduated from high school there and found a job as a secretary. When she was 20 years old, she'd been out of high school for a little while, she met a young man whose best qualification was he had a Los Angeles address. And they married, and she went to Los Angeles. The marriage was doomed from the beginning. He was a used car salesman, she was nothing, and they eventually divorced, and she came back to Provo. The next time, she chose more wisely. She met a young man who was an attorney, and he worked for the utility company in Utah. And she looked into his eyes and saw the same thing that she reflected from hers, and that was ambition. So they did marry, and they had a little apartment. Within a year, they had a new baby named Stanley, and she enjoyed making clothes for him, and she made curtains for their little apartment. And when Stanley was 3 months old, her husband came home waving a telegram saying, "I've got a job offer in New York City. Shall I take it?" Well, yes, immediately. So when Florence was 22 years old with a 3-month baby on her lap, she found herself on a train barreling toward Grand Central Station in New York City. And she is going to do the same thing there that she was doing in Provo, making little Stanley baby clothes and making apartment curtains for the window. Her husband's name was Odlum, we'll just call him Mr. Odlum so I can think of his name. Her husband's name was Mr. Odlum, and he did succeed at the law firm. And he came home one day and said, "We've been invited to dinner at the boss's house." And she said what any woman would say, "But I don't have anything to wear." And he said, "Well, here's $10. You go and buy something to wear." And $10 would go a long way in 1919. So she goes out and she leaves little Stanley at home asleep. They certainly don't have a babysitter. She leaves little Stanley asleep, so she knows she only has a limited time. And she doesn't find anything that she likes. She finds the dresses that she sees are shoddy, not well made, have too many bows and buttons and frippery on it. They're not very well tailored. And she's very discouraged, but ultimately she buys herself a dress. What she's looking for is a little black dress, that thing we should all have in our closet. So she ultimately buys this black dress, takes it home and redoes it. And that's what she wears to the dinner party. Now, the dinner party must have worked because in 14 years later, this is where Hortense and her husband live, in this lovely house in Forest Hills, New York, just outside of New York City. He has quit his job with the law firm and has started an investment firm of his own. It's early 1929. He gets out of the stock market. Mr. Odlum gets out of the stock market and goes with cash. So after the crash, Mr. Odlum is one of the richest men in America. They say his fortune was in today's money would be $240 million. And what his company did was to take companies that were going bankrupt and kind of rehab them and resell them or run them himself. He bought Greyhound bus lines, he bought Transcontinental Airlines, he bought RKO movie studios. Those were the kind of companies he was buying and reselling. And they're living in this house. Hortense loves to give dinner parties. She likes to go to lunches with ladies. She likes to play bridge. Stanley is 19 years old and a young man about 10 dating debutantes. And they have another little son who's 10 who plays tennis. Everything's going great for Florence, for Hortense. And so she writes a letter to her sister back in Utah, and she said, I have become that rare and exclusive thing, a woman who has found happiness. She's very happy with her life. So one night, Mr. Odlum goes out to dinner with other businessmen, and they come home and are in the library having brandy and cigars when Hortense comes downstairs to say goodnight and to greet the gentleman. And they said, wait a minute, Hortense, do you ever shop at Bonwit Teller? And she said, no, I've never gone there. And her husband said, why not? She said, I suppose it's because I thought they never have anything that I would want. Which led to a discussion of what is it that women want? And this is where Hortense felt she could really speak up and answer that question. She said, women care more about fashion than men do. Women can wear a new dress and feel like $1 million. It matters to them what they're wearing. And the men kind of shook their head like they thought they understood what she was saying. And she went to bed. The next morning, she comes downstairs and her husband says, Hortense, I want you to go to Bonwit Teller today. I've arranged a car. You're going to take the car there. And I want you to look over Bonwit Teller and see what you think. See what kind of store it is. What is it that they don't have that you think a store should have? Because obviously her husband had just bought this store and was trying to decide if he was going to keep it or rehab it or what he was going to do with it. So he sends Hortense down as his emissary. She gets to the store that morning and she goes in and she nervously greets Mr. Teller, who says, I set up an office for you here next to mine and you may use my secretary. And she said, I wouldn't know what to do with an office and secretary. I don't know anything about this. Within a year, she was running the store. Now, what happened was things like the first thing that she did, she noticed that the millinery department, the hat store, was on the back of the 3rd floor. She said, move it down and put the hats in the window. If a woman can't afford a new dress, she could pay $5 for a hat and still feel like that proverbial $1 million. So they moved the millinery department. But she made other arrangements, other things that made the store better. Bonwit Teller was the first store on 5th Avenue to have central air conditioning. She also installed on the top floor a men's club. One man said they poured the best scotch on 5th Avenue at Bonwit Teller. And they would have fashion shows where the models would come by and say, oh, and Mr. Smith, your wife was admiring this dress this morning. And they said that the Christmas fashion show was lingerie and would have put Victoria's Secret to shame. Her husband's name was Floyd. He didn't approve. Okay, he did approve of all of those things. So all of those things she made the store better. Not only that, she increased the income. The first year, the income went up nearly 5%. The next year, 10%. The 3rd year she was running the store, the income was up 30% from where it had been at the beginning of her tenure, which made it worth so much more. Now, here's the store. She took a poorly run, debt-laden store and she made it profitable. But here's the rest of the story. That's the front of Bonwit Teller. Bonwit Teller isn't there anymore. It was torn down to make way for Trump Tower, by the way. But that was the front of Bonwit Teller back then. Here's the rest of the story. There's Bonwit Teller. Oh, well, let me tell you this story first before I get to the next one, the rest of the story. When she was running Bonwit Teller, it was the thing to have a famous artist come in and fix your windows, design the windows. So Hortense hired Salvador Dali to come in. He had 2 windows to decorate. The first one he called Day, and he wanted to illustrate the myth of Narcissus, you know, the god that looked in and saw himself and fell in love with himself, the greed of American. I don't know if that was a good thing to put in a store window, but he wanted to illustrate that. So he had a mannequin with beetles crawling out of her hair, and she had on only green feathers placed in strategic positions across her body. And she was about to step into this large claw-footed bathtub. In the bathtub were 100 mannequin arms holding mirrors up to her. That was the window. The next window he called Night, and he had made a platform, covered it with black satin sheets, and painted flames across the bottom, and had a mannequin in a black negligee on this bed, and he called that Desire. Well, he worked, and he had covered the windows so nobody could see what he was doing. He worked very hard for about 3 days. When he finished his work, late one afternoon, he went back to his hotel to rest and get some sleep. Well, the next morning when the staff came in, they pulled the papers off the window and were shocked. Everybody was totally shocked. And then the customers started calling Hortense's office with complaints. And so she had them take it out and put a regular model just wearing a rather stately suit in the windows. When Salvador Dali comes back, he sees what's happened. He's enraged, and in a mixture of Spanish, French, and English, he goes to Hortense's office and says, "You have destroyed a work of art." And she calms him down and says, "Maybe Fifth Avenue isn't ready for this yet." Okay, now here's the rest of the story. This is good old Floyd Odlum and his mistress. Before Hortense took over Bonwit Teller, she was out with her girlfriends one day at the hair salon having a manicure and having her hair done. And as women do in a beauty salon, she began talking and she said, "Poor Floyd is just working so hard. He's going down to Palm Beach this weekend to play golf with some friends." When the manicurist finished her nails, she got up and went to the telephone and bought a train ticket to Palm Beach. Now, the reason this is important is it becomes a big part of this story. The manicurist was a woman named Jacqueline Cochran, Jackie Cochran. Has anybody heard of her? When I tell you about her, I bet you might have. Jackie Cochran grew up in a foster home. She left the foster system when she was 14 and drove herself around depression-laden America. She even worked in a garage. She could work on engines, but she made a cosmetic cream and would go door to door selling it at the farmers. And she would tell the farmer's wife, "I know times are hard, but for just a nickel, you can buy this cream and it's gonna get rid of all of your wrinkles." So that was what she did. And she finally made her way to New York, got this job as a manicurist, goes down to Palm Beach, puts herself in a position to meet Floyd, and they begin having an affair. Now, is this why Floyd bought Bonwit Teller? So Hortense would have something to do? Probably, because here's what happened with Jackie Cochran. Floyd and Hortense divorced. Hortense never accepted it. Even to the later years of her life, she would say things like, "As my husband said the other day," and they never spoke again after the divorce. But Jackie Cochran was an ambitious, talented person. When Floyd said, "What would you like to do? Would you like a job?" She said, "Well, I really enjoyed selling the cosmetics." And he said, "Oh, well, you'll never make any money doing that. You'd have to fly." She said, "Then get me flying lessons." So he does. They move to California. They buy the ranch. He's running RKO Studios, and she becomes one of the top 100 aviatrixes in America. This is a picture of Jackie with Amelia Earhart, one of her best friends. During World War II, Jackie joined the WASP, Women's Army Service Pilots, and they were the ones who would take the planes from the factories to the war zone. She became the first woman to fly a bomber across the Atlantic Ocean. getting a plane from the factory to the front lines of the war. An entirely different kind of person than Florence, than Hortense. And they're just diametrically opposed. In later years, Hortense wrote her autobiography, and she titled it A Woman's Place. And she said, I never should have taken that job with the department store. I hated every minute of it. I felt like I was going home at night with stacks of paper. I couldn't have a dinner party because I always had work to do at night. Now, this is a woman who didn't know how to run a store and yet increased its income by 30% in 3 years and made it a success. And she says, I don't know how I did all those things. I didn't enjoy doing it. I didn't like doing it. Compare that to Jackie Cochran, who's flying bombers across the Atlantic Ocean. So the contrast there was just too much of what women could do and how they did it. Hortense was, perhaps Floyd had a motive for giving her the store, but what she did for the store and what she did for women's careers was simply remarkable. This is a picture of Hortense in her later years with her 2 grandsons. She became estranged from her sons. Stanley died of alcoholism. Her younger son worked for his dad, so that made a difficult situation. The grandchildren didn't like her very much. She would buy them things they didn't want. She didn't understand them. That's a particularly happy picture, but that was not particularly representative of the way her relationship with her grandchildren was at the time. After she left Bonwit Teller, she went to California and built a little house not far from the ranch where Jackie and Floyd lived. And she died pretty unhappily. She was unhappy. And let everybody know how unhappy she was. Now, not so the next person we're going to hear. That's Hortense and her 2 sisters. And aren't they pretty and fashionably dressed? The next person we're going to talk about is named Dorothy Shaver. Now, when Dorothy got to New York for the first time, she might as well have clicked her heels together and said, I'm Dorothy and I'm home. She loved New York. Now, Dorothy grew up in Mena, Arkansas. It's a small town on the western side of Arkansas. And her father was an attorney. He was a good father. He and his wife loved their children. They had 2 girls and 2 boys. Dorothy was kind of a tomboy. She liked to play baseball with her brothers. She played tennis. They had horses. Dorothy had all of those things. She wasn't wealthy, but for a small town, she was very well-to-do. When she graduated from high school, she went to the University of Arkansas for a couple of years, but didn't much like it. So she came home and was really at loose ends. Her younger sister, Dorothy, wanted to be an artist and had won a scholarship to an art school in Chicago. And her mother says, I couldn't possibly let you go to Chicago by yourself. You'd need a chaperone. And Dorothy goes, I'll go. I'll be the chaperone. So the 2 girls head off to Chicago. Dorothy gets a job. She's modeling for Marshall Fields, and she's doing some temp work as a secretary. And Elsie, her little sister, is going to art school. Well, they're having a good time. They're enjoying living in the big city. Elsie enters a contest to illustrate, do a magazine illustration for Marshall Fields. Elsie's work were little fluffy-haired kids with big eyes. There was very illustration. She wasn't a fine artist. She was an illustrator. And she won the prize. And it was a pretty large cash prize. And Dorothy said, I know what let's do. Let's take your prize money and get on the train and go to New York City. We've never been there, and we'd like to see it. And let's don't tell our parents where we're going. So they do. They get on the train. They go to New York City. It's the 1920s, and it's the flappers. That's when Dorothy gets off the train and goes, I'm home. This is it. So they try to find a way they can stay in New York. When they run out of money, they have to send a telegram to Mother and Dad and say, we're out of money and we're in New York. And they said, oh, it's horrible, you can't stay in New York. Oh, but we want to try to make it here. And the mother says, well, I have this distant cousin, and I'm going to send him and his wife over to visit you. So Mr. and Mrs. Rayburn, distant cousins of her mother, go and visit Dorothy and Elsie and say, oh, you can't live here. This is a terrible place. We'll help you find a better apartment. They do. They find a better apartment, and the girls start looking for work. And they come up with this idea. They're making cloth dolls with hand-painted faces, and each doll has a story that goes with it. And they're called Little Shavers. This is the Dorothy and Elsie's Shavers. Elsie does the painting of the faces and writes the cute stories about each doll. Y'all, it's a Cabbage Patch Kid. That's what it is. Taking the idea from. So Elsie paints the faces, and they sell them on the streets, and they sell them in little boutiques if they can, and they're making enough money to stay in New York. One night, Mr. and Mrs. Rayburn come by, and the girls notice that they're paying an awful lot of attention to the dolls. The next morning, 4 men in suit come to the door of their apartment, knock on the door, and said, we're here to give you a contract with Lord & Taylor department stores to sell your dolls in a boutique exclusively at Lord & Taylor's. So this is the Little Shavers boutique at the Lord & Taylor's department store in New York City. And the girls are now making enough money that they have to have a warehouse to store the dolls in, hire other people to sew them, and Elsie's still painting the faces on there, and they're making tons of money, and Dorothy's doing the bookkeeping and the business part of the business. Everything's going great until Elsie says, I really want to go back to art school and finish my art degree. Dorothy is not eager to lose her business partner, but she ultimately acquiesced, and her cousin, Mr. Rayburn, comes to her and says, I'd like to put you to work at Lord & Taylor and put you on the management track. Now, that's nepotism, I know, but Dorothy succeeded beyond Mr. Rayburn's wildest dreams to get this done. She had good ideas, and she carried them through. This is Dorothy as a middle-aged executive. When she became ultimately president of Lord & Taylor department stores, she was the first woman in America to make $1 million salary as president of Lord & Taylor's. But some of her ideas, one of her ideas was she went to her cousin and said, give me $800,000 and I'm going to go to France. This is in the 20s. And I'm going to buy French products, and I'll come back and we'll take a whole floor of Lord & Taylor department store, and we'll sell these French products at this store. And we'll have a big gala ball the night before it opens, and we'll see how that works. Nobody knew if it would be a success or not. We'll come the night of the big gala, and Dorothy's standing at the door of the department store in her beautiful ball gown and her long kid-skin gloves. It was a smashing success. Over the 3 weeks they were there, over 300,000 people came through the doors of Lord & Taylor just to look at the French things that Dorothy had brought. Dorothy was also the one who came up with that loopy script handwriting Lord & Taylor. She was also the one who made sure that the awnings on Fifth Avenue at the Lord & Taylor store were changed out regularly. In the summer, they had printed red roses on them, which became the Lord & Taylor logo, that red rose. In the fall, they were russet. In the winter, they were ice blue. And in the spring, they were spring green. So everything matched. All those things were Dorothy's ideas. She had so many other ideas. They had a lovely lunchroom at the Lord & Taylor's, and when you were through with your lunch, they would bring you a cigarette on a silver tray to present to the ladies after lunch. All of those little amenities. If you were a bride and you brought your trousseau at Lord & Taylor's, then you got a little hand-engraved, pearl-encrusted charm for your charm bracelet. And if you were going to have a baby and bought the baby's layette there, then you got the appropriately colored rattle when the baby was born. All of those things were customer service. Oh, and she would have, at the glove counter, she had the velvet cushion there. So when you were trying on gloves, you could put your arm up like this to try on your gloves. She just made everything very customer-centric. But what Dorothy is really known for is the American look. I've had people, after I give this review, people who come to me and say, I studied fashion merchandising in college, and Dorothy Shaver was one of the people that we studied. Up until this point in America, women's fashion was simply copies of Parisian fashion. The department stores would send their buyers to Paris, to the Paris shows, and surreptitiously sketch the things. And then they'd come back to New York, go to the 7th Avenue rag trade merchants and say, can you copy this? And that's what, and then it would have the Lord & Taylor logo in it, or the, whatever the store was, the store logo in it. So they were all knockoffs of French fashion. And this was even before 1939, when the Nazis took over in Paris and made French fashion impossible to get. Dorothy already had American look fashion in her stores. And she said, American women don't want French fashion. That's not the way we live our lives. We live our lives as mothers and homemakers. We live our lives going to football games and riding bicycles and sporting events. That's how American women live. And those are the kind of clothes that American women want to buy. So she is known as the founder of the American look. We can all probably thank her today that we can wear pants here tonight instead of a Parisian dress. She was so successful in this that when World War II broke out, Dorothy was the one hired to design the uniforms for the women's service people. And you see it says, America's best dressed women was the caption under those. This is Dorothy and her sister Elsie. Neither of them ever married. They loved to travel. You can see some of Elsie's paintings in the background, what kind of illustrations that she did. They loved to travel. They went on trips. They loved to furnish their apartments. They kept getting bigger and better apartments. They even had a house in Connecticut, and they loved to do it. And they did very avant-garde things like a tiger skin rug in front of a marble fireplace with antique Chinese andirons that weighed that weighed hundreds of pounds each. That was what they did. And Elsie did Dorothy a big favor when Dorothy died first. Elsie buried her, and on her tombstone, she wrote her age as being 2 years younger than she really was. Okay, this is a mother and two sisters. The one we're going to be interested in is the older sister. Her name is Gwendolyn Stultz. Their mother, this is another example of when the father left the family. Their last name was Stutz, and so obviously her father's nickname was Bearcat, and he ran off and never came home. Their mother wanted to keep her girls in Catholic school, and so she went out and found a job. She was a receptionist at a dentist office, and she overdressed for her job all the time. One of her grandchildren remembered her being very well dressed, very well groomed, perfect hair, perfect nails, and he said it was like she had a 2x4 down her back because her posture was always so perfect. That was Dorothy's introduction to fashion, because remember, she goes to a Catholic girls' school. She wore a uniform every day. Her younger sister is Carol. So that's how they grew up, and Geraldine, Jerry, doesn't really care that much about fashion, but she knows her mother has it. She knows that. When she graduates from high school, she goes to an all-girls Catholic college where she's very popular. She starts off majoring in drama, but then she decides she's going to go in journalism. And she's president of the girls' social club at this college, and they're going to raise money by having a fashion show. They get Marshall Field to donate the fashions, and the girls are all going to wear the clothes, and she's going to, Dorothy's going to be the MC, but she's going to be the first model out, too. They practice, they get to pick out their clothes, they're having such a good time. The next morning, they all arrive getting ready to go on stage for the fashion show. Unbeknownst to them, the hotel staff that night had waxed and polished the floor of the runway. And as the first one out, Geraldine comes gliding out, and immediately her feet slip out from under and she lands flat on her back. She said she looked around to see 500 horrified faces. And she said, I could either laugh or I could cry. And I chose to laugh. And that was how she lived her life from then on. When she graduated from college, she entered a contest with Condé Nast magazines. Remember, her major is journalism. And she had to write an essay. And the winner of this essay contest was going to get a year's internship at Vogue magazine. She wrote the essay, and she did well. It did gain some attention, but she lost out to another young fashionista named Jacqueline Bouvier. So that's who she lost to. She found a job in Chicago kind of as a party planner, and one of the things that parties did was they would show movies, and she picked some pretty inappropriate movies to show and got fired. So she decided she would use her Condé Nast contacts and go to New York and try to get a job as a fashion journalist. She interviews several at all the Condé Nast magazines, fashion and other magazines, does not get a job until she finally goes to Glamour magazine. This is Geraldine in the middle in college. She goes to Glamour and she interviews there, and the editor comes to her and says, I shouldn't hire you because you're too young and too inexperienced, but you have style, and that's something we can't teach you. So she is hired by Glamour magazine. She eventually works her way up to accessories editor. And she writes articles about what accessories women can use, how a belt can change the whole idea of a dress. And she says, if women need accessories, I should have mine. You should have accessories that are your signatures. Your signatures. And so her signature was a scarf on her head, lots of bangle bracelets, and a faint British accent. This is one of the illustrations in her magazine that she hired a young Andy Warhol to do this illustration. And it was for a article about shoes, and it was titled, this is in the 50s, Walking Shoes, Stepping Up. And so those step ladders there. She also did articles like an opposing page said, this is fashion for the stay-at-home mom, this is fashion for the New York working girl. So she juxtaposed all those things. She gave those people all those ideas. She had to have a hysterectomy when she was in her 30s. So she said, I'll never marry. But she ultimately went to see a therapist because of her depression after the hysterectomy. She also, her sister Carol, that you saw in the first picture, stayed in Chicago and married a good Catholic boy and had 6 children. And she loved those nieces and nephews and were always wanting to send presents to them. So she was running out of money, even as the accessories editor at Glamour magazine. One of her clients at Glamour was a man who owned a shoe conglomerate. His name was Maxie Jarman. And he had just acquired a new shoe company called I. Miller. And he had become Geraldine's mentor. There was never any romantic relationship between the two of them, but he would buy ads, and she was selling the ads in the magazine. Very business-like relationship. So when he bought this new shoe company, he decided he wanted to keep it. And he went to Geraldine and he said, I think you're just the person to run this company. She said, I have no experience in retail. I'm a journalist, remember, it's my experience. He says, I know, but I think I know you can do it. I know how people work. So she left Glamour and went to work for Maxie and really made that shoe brand very popular. Before long, Maxie had acquired a new store called Henry Bendel. Now, people might say Henri, because it's spelled Henri, But I'm here to tell you, Henry Bendel was born in Louisiana, and that was just a Cajun spelling. And I'm told it's pretentious to call Henry Bendel Henri Bendel. So Henry Bendel, another failing department store. Maxie sees how well Geraldine has worked with the one shoe brand. So when he buys the store, he puts her in charge of Henry Bendel. Henry Bendel is known for very opulent gowns. Among its major customers were Lee Radziwill, Patricia Kennedy Lawford, Princess Grace, Truman Capote's swans. But that was all they sold, were these ball gowns. So the store was failing, even though they had a very expensive and fine clientele and these lovely opulent gowns. They also had a doorman named Buster, who you see in this picture. And Buster knew that's Geraldine getting out of a cab, but Buster knew all of the customers in the store, and when they were through shopping, they'd come out and hand their bags to Buster, and he'd call their cabs or their limos to come pick them up. Buster is going to stay. Obviously, Geraldine liked him a lot. So she goes to Henry Bendel, the store, and she sees a long, narrow store. It would be hard to shop there. And so she thinks about it for a few weeks and comes up with the idea she's going to do a street of shops. Each little section of the store will have its own thing. Here's the ball gowns, but the next part of the store might have the lingerie that you need to wear under it. The next part would be the jewels. The next part would be the gloves. The next part would be the shoes. So you could do all of your shopping and coordinate your fine dress that you just bought with all of the other things that you're going to need. Well, it was an idea that changed the way department stores organized their goods at the time. She was also one of the first ones to bring the British look to New York, the mini skirts and the go-go boots. Meanwhile, Maxie Jarman paid her a huge salary because she said that's what it would take to get her to leave so she could pay her medical bills and pay for the college education of her nieces and nephews. And he paid her a huge salary. When someone asked her how much she made, she said, "I am very well paid." So she was a success there. The other thing that she was a success at was using American designers. Dorothy Shaver started the American look, but Geraldine Stutz took it a step further. She went to the people on 7th Avenue and said, "Do you have any designs of your own that you'd like to sell? I can give you exclusive selling place in my store." And they said, "Sure, we've got our own designs." She launched the career of people like, you'll see in this picture, Lee Bailey, Ralph Lauren. You can probably pick out Ralph Lauren. He's the stylish guy in the high-waisted pants. Holly Harp, several others that she started their careers, literally, by letting them design their own clothes and then selling them at her store. Okay, I've told you about 3 women, and I wondered what made them successful. What was it that they all had? They didn't have anything in common. They came from different family lives. They came from different places. They didn't have any experience in retail, but they had experience in fashion. What was it that made them succeed? And the only word I could come up with was flair, and knowing how fashion should influence a person's life. Dorothy Shaver said, "You should wear clothes that when your beau or your girlfriend sees you, they don't say, 'I love your dress.' They say, 'You look wonderful.' Don't let the dress wear you," in other words. And Geraldine Stutz's mantra, the thing that she was famous for saying is, "Fashion says me too. Style says only me." So all of those things kind of went together, and I said, it's flair that brought them together. And so the only way I could think of tonight to close it was to tell you all, you look wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you, Dana. And Now, we're about to have a great national holiday, a parade. It's going to be all kinds of fun. But as Betty Davis once said, fasten your seatbelts. You're going to be in for a bumpy ride over the next couple of weeks. We're going to do murder and mayhem. You remember last season we had Meaning of Malice and the King of Diamonds and that sort of thing. Next week we're going to have master murder mystery writer Harry Hunsaker with his book, The Life and Death of Rose Doucette, followed by reviewer Holly Stevens the next week doing The Three Emmas, a great Dallas story of crime and mayhem. So fasten your seatbelts and we're going to have some fun. But meanwhile, enjoy your 4th of July.